I'd like to also say thank you so much for the invitation to contribute to the conference today. It's a real privilege to be able to join you. And I said this last week, I'm really looking forward to joining you on the 1st of December as a new staff member, Dean of EDI. Okay, so for the next 40 minutes or so, I'd like to talk about the race equality journey at the UEL and a little bit about the process, but also focus on the lessons that we learn along the way. So the whole process started back in December 2016, and I remember it well. It was at the staff Christmas party, and the Vice Chancellor pulled me to one side and asked me if I would be willing to lead on the Race Equality Charter Mark. And I asked him, what does that actually involve? What is it? And he said, oh, it's a charter mark that we're applying for. I signed up to it. And all you'll have to do is just chair a few meetings. And so I said, yeah, absolutely, I can chair a few meetings. That's not a problem. For those of you who have been involved in the Race Equality Charter Mark, you know that it's not just a matter of chairing a few meetings. You are looking at transforming the institution, the culture of the institution. So it's much, much bigger than that. So what we did early in 2017 was put a call out across the university for staff and students to join our REC self-assessment team. And when we held our first meeting, this is something I referred to last Thursday when I spoke at the Learning and Teaching Day. Unfortunately, everyone but one person in that meeting was a person of colour. As I looked around the room, we had just black and brown colleagues and some students join us to be part of the race equality self-assessment team. There was one white colleague and she was our charters manager. And so she had to be there, but she wanted to be there anyway. She would have been there anyway. And one of the questions that I was asking, that I was constantly asked by colleagues was, is this a tick box exercise? Why now? Why are you looking to change the institution? Do we have senior management behind this? Why would senior management want to engage in this? Because it means giving up some power if you are talking about really changing the institution, because our senior management was all white. And we were talking about a complete change and having representation of black and brown colleagues at every single level. So the question was, why would senior management want to give up some of their power? And also, some colleagues were asking, why do we need the REC? And so one of the things that I showed them, and unfortunately I can't show you that link, but please, in your own time, take a look at that area if you haven't seen it well, the colour of power. The colour of power shows images of who actually holds the power in our society. So it will show you images of vice chancellors, politicians, heads of organisations. And although the website is a few years out of date, the images remain the same. Because we had a largely black and brown self-assessment team, one of the things that I said to colleagues was, you need to go and get a friend, bring a friend to our next meeting, but that friend must be white, okay? Go and get some white people to join in this work. And I went and handpicked some people as well. And one of the things that I heard from colleagues and my white colleagues when I talked to them about this work was, well, I'm not sure if I have the skills to do this. I'm really scared of making mistakes and saying the wrong thing. So, is there something I can do kind of at the sidelines? And it was like, no, you have to join in and work towards this with other people who want to make a change at the university. So we formed our main REC team and we had 27 members, staff and students, as part of our rec team, our main rec team. And within that rec team, we had 3 subgroups. So we had a group responsible for data, so analysing the data from the surveys, but also organising the focus groups and analysing the themes that came out of the focus group. We had a comms group, and the responsibility of the comms group was to really communicate with the university community about the data and about the events that we were having, and just put out posters and engage in social media so that everyone was aware of what we were doing. And then we had a consultation stroke events group. Throughout the process, we hosted many events, and I'll talk about those in a moment. We hosted many events, and that subgroup had responsibility for organising those events with our main events team within the university. But we also made sure that we constantly engaged in consultation with staff and students, and so that group was responsible for that area as well. And you can see the tweet on the left from me. We actually became firm friends. We formed a really close-knit bond, and we spoke about the importance of this work on a regular basis, and we celebrated small achievements along the way. And so we would eat out together, we would drink, we would have lunch together. And we formed some really close-knit bonds between the people that were part of the the self-assessment team. So it took about 2.5 years for us to work towards getting our rec. And we facilitated 19 events, including the Inside the Ivory Tower book launch. Dr. Jenny Douglas was part of that. She graced us with her presence back in 2017, and that was the most successful event that we hosted. We had over 200 people attend that book launch, and our Vice-Chancellor at the time, Professor Nora Colton, was so moved by what she read in that book that she bought a copy for each of the Board of Governors and urged them to read it. So we hosted the Inside the Ivory Tower book launch. There were lots of school events and also team presentations. I said a moment ago, it's important that we consult with staff as well as students throughout the process. And so we hosted rec workshops whereby we were able to just continually update colleagues on the progress that we were making. We hosted the rec workshops and shared the data that we found. We had 3 workshops on the action plan. The action plan was crucial, and we needed to make sure that we heard the voices from every single corner of the institution. So we hosted 3 different workshops for staff and students, and also we held a student EDI conference. This was the student union really getting involved in this process, and they hosted a conference that was incredibly well attended. So across the events, we engaged approximately 700 students and staff, and also we had a very good response to our student and staff survey. So it was over 1,200 responses. And as you can see at the very bottom there, the self-assessment team and its various subgroups met over 30 times within that 2-year period. So one of the things that we found important, and it is still important, is having a dialogue, creating an open and appropriate space for colleagues to have conversations about race and racism within the institution. This is absolutely crucial because we have colleagues who have never really engaged in these conversations before, and my thoughts are it is really important that we ensure we meet people where they are at this moment in time. People are at different points in the journey, and we have to meet them where they are. So we have to listen to what they are saying to understand. So that middle section there, listen to understand, is absolutely crucial. So moving on to the events. These were the kinds of events that we hosted over the 2-year period. You can see in the top left-hand corner, we hosted a BME Early Career Researcher Conference, and that was the third one. Dr. Bernardine established this conference to feed the pipeline from undergrad to postgrad to lecturer, professor, and so on and so forth. And that was hugely successful. We had, it was a sold out conference. And perhaps the OU can think about hosting a conference like this next year. So far, all 4 conferences have been held in London, and Dr. Bernardine would like to host the conference outside of London. So that's a consideration for the Open University for next year. We were fortunate. We had Baroness Shami Chakrabarti join us. She talked about her book, it was new at that point, of women. And so that was an evening with Baroness Shami Chakrabarti. We hosted Professor Kevin Hilton at one of our conferences. And in the middle there, you can see Afua Hirsch. She joined us for an evening and a discussion around racism in journalism, but also in higher education. You can see our BAME staff network, and I apologise for using that acronym, but that's what it's called at this moment in time, bottom right-hand corner. And also, one of the events was just simply having a conversation about what we can do to change the institution. And we invited colleagues and students to just put their ideas down on post-it notes, and we collected the post-it notes, and we included a lot of that information in our action plan. I know you probably can't see the small writing, and that's okay. What I want to show you is, this is the response from one of the staff surveys that we did during the consultation process. And what you will see is, in the blue shaded area, you have the responses from ethnic minority staff, from Black and brown staff. And in the pink shaded area, you have the responses from non-ethnic minority staff. And for me, this really illustrates that Black and brown staff experience higher education or their university very, very different to white staff. And I'm hoping that you get to see this particular slide in a little more detail. It doesn't have all of the items, but you will see that there are certain areas that are more important to Black and brown staff compared to white counterparts. So the diversity of UEL impacts on my sense of belonging. The diversity of UEL impacts on my desire to stay. Also, you will see that Black and brown staff have experienced racial discrimination on campus and also in the local area compared to white staff. Okay, sorry, moving on. So one of the things that I had to ask when I spoke to senior management about the work that we're doing was, we have to be serious about doing this work, and we have to be serious about creating change at UEL, because what I'm sharing with you is a lot of information about the way staff experience the university. And so this information came out of our focus group. Staff, Black staff saying, I would not recommend UEL to a Black academic friend who is trying to gain promotion, as there isn't any within. And although that I'm saying this is what we found at UEL. I don't think this is unique to UEL. These are issues that we see across the sector. At UEL, there are sound bites and not real appreciation of its diverse student population. A racial ethnic mix of different grades of staff and attainment of students makes me realise that there is a level of institutional racism at UEL, as in many other organisations. And these are difficult questions and action around power and voice and who is heard and who can act. And this next one, the fourth one down, is something that I have seen on more than one occasion, unfortunately. I have reported an incident in the past and suffered further abuse from my manager when I reported it. Unfortunately, all too often we hear that when you do report these incidents, it makes you the problem because people don't know how to address the issues of microaggression, of racist comments, and so it makes you the problem for actually reporting it and wanting to take it further or wanting it addressed. My immediate line manager has more than once made racist comments about the student body, suggesting that if they are not white and middle class, they are not as well equipped for university as those who are. Unfortunately, when we hear comments like this, it's problematic because it feeds into one of the big problems that we have in higher education, and that is in relation to the degree award gap. And we have that degree award gap across the sector. And, if we have managers who feel that students who are not white and who are not middle class are not well equipped for university, then they are essentially saying that, we are looking at this from a deficit perspective. These individuals are not well enough equipped to actually be here. And then also white staff, white staff at UEL can see this. I am white and suspect I am treated better than some of my colleagues because of this, as there is plenty of racism in the UK. As a white person, I can see that my colleagues of colour are not necessarily treated the same as me. All profs are white. All management is white in our school. And then also, Omar Khan's tweet. And Omar Khan was the director of the Runnymede Trust up until I think it was last year. And he highlights the importance of representation and the issues around that in higher education in the UK. So there are roughly 2,000 Black female students for every Black female professor. And there are around 50 white male students for every white male professor. You're 40 times more likely to see a professor who looks like you if you're white and male than if you're Black and female. And we know the importance of role models. We know the importance of representation, and I truly believe in, this popular saying of you can't be what you can't see. It is so important for students and for staff who are starting out, who want to progress, to see people who look like them in senior positions in higher education. So with regards to our survey, we had 6 themes that emerged, and you can see on the left-hand side, the university culture and organisation, so a sense of belonging and having discussions on race, bullying and harassment, once again, right the way across the sector. These are not just unique to UEL. Teaching and learning. So the curriculum, what are we actually teaching our students? Degree award gaps and the progression of students were key as well under that umbrella. Employability, so graduate level outcomes, staff career progression, and recruitment and selection. So including the transparency of that process. And so we decided to organise our action plan around these 6 themes. And I know that some of you have our Race Equality Charter Mark submission, and you will see that we've organised the action plan. It's quite a comprehensive action plan. It's over 30 pages long. But each of the actions that we decided to include relate to one of the 6 themes. And so it was really important, as I said earlier, that we consulted widely on what those actions should be. So we organised 3 workshops, and we invited staff and students. We invited senior managers as well to be part of the workshop to talk about, let's flesh out these actions. What do we actually need to do to change the culture and generate a more equal UEL? And those 3 workshops were really well attended, and we also had an email account. So if people couldn't make the workshops, they were more than welcome to email some ideas or meet with me or any of the SAT members and talk about what these actions should be. As I said, we wanted to make sure that we reached as many people as we possibly could. So 2.5 years in the making, we had many challenges along the way. Let me give you one example. For those of you who know anything about the University of East London, it's an institution that over the years has been in a constant state of change. We started the Race Equality Charter Mark with 1 Vice-Chancellor. Okay, and I referred to Professor Nora Colton a moment ago. She wasn't the Vice-Chancellor at that point. It was Professor John Jogin. So we started with Professor John Jogin as our Vice-Chancellor. And then halfway through, Nora Colton was our acting Vice-Chancellor. And then by the time we finished the Race Equality Charter Mark, by the time we actually got the award, we had a 3rd Vice-Chancellor. So, we were in a constant state of change at senior management level. And you know what it's like when you get a new Vice-Chancellor. My background is in sport, so I always liken a new Vice-Chancellor to having a new football manager. The bottom line is you get a new Vice-Chancellor, you get a new strategy, and you get a complete new senior management team. So when a football manager gets sacked, he or she goes and they bring in their own team. So it's all systems change again. But the positive thing about this was that all 3 Vice-Chancellors were fully supportive of the work that we were doing. So that was, one of the challenges that we had at senior management level. Interestingly, there were many challenges along the way when we were interacting with colleagues and trying to get colleagues on board with some of the work that we were doing. And I'm not going to go, there were lots of issues that came up. But one of the things that I constantly heard from so many different people was, we need more data. How do we know that this data is correct? How do we know that these gaps exist in this area? We need more data. And in actual fact, we don't need more data. We have more data than we could, possibly use. What we need is action. We need to make sure that we use the data that we have. We have qualitative and we have quantitative data. We need to ensure that we use that data and form actions that will work, and we implement them. And another challenge from staff was around the way they were looking at, in particular, the degree award gap. And this came up last week, Thursday. One of our colleagues here at the OU talked about the way we look at, racism, in regards to the degree award gap, and people not wanting to look at this from a non-deficit perspective. So all too often when I talk about, gaps in degree awards, I am hearing things like, the students are first generation university students, or they come from working class backgrounds. So that is why there are gaps. It's got nothing else to do with anything. That is why there are gaps in degree awards. And part of the reason why we changed the terminology from attainment to degree awards is so that the university takes responsibility for these gaps. When we talk about attainment, we are saying this is the level that we are awarding, or that we are marking the student at. When we talk about university degree award gaps, the university has to own the problem, rather than saying it's a deficit issue, therefore it is with the student, so therefore there is nothing we can do about it. We have to take responsibility for what is going on and for these inequalities that exist within the institution. So one of the key areas that I have been working on is making sure that there is leadership buy-in and that there is accountability. Accountability is key. You can have the greatest of action plans, but if you don't hold people accountable for implementing the various actions, then you are not going to get anywhere, because this work is difficult. And, it can be very, very messy at times. And the conversations can be very uncomfortable and very difficult. And so I have regular meetings with the senior leadership team, and we focus on race. And so we've got two groups that have come out of our Race Equality Charter, Mark. We have our REC implementation group, and that is largely the senior leaders who have taken on a various part of the action plan. So our Pro Vice Chancellor for Education and Experience is responsible for the area of learning and teaching. And I obviously work with him on, those areas. The PVC for Innovation and Impact, which is PVC for Research, is responsible for equity in career progression. And that's crucial because it's things like, sabbaticals, and making sure that, junior members of staff, Black and Brown members of staff, experience equality in that process. When you are applying for sabbaticals, and get the help that you need when you are applying for research grants and so on and so forth. The Director of HR, responsible for bullying and harassment, and also the transparency within staff recruitment, so that whole selection and recruitment process. The PVC for Careers and Enterprise, responsible for graduate outcomes, student employability, and closing the gap, because at the moment a lot of what we're seeing is making sure that the students have graduate level jobs, but there is a 10% gap between white students and Black and Brown students with regards to student employability. My role as Dean of the Office for Institutional Equity, I have a special focus on organisational culture, but really I work with the senior management in all of these areas. And the deans of our 6 schools are responsible for implementing the EDI plans at a local level, and also they are held accountable by making sure that the actions are part of their performance and development review on an annual basis. So as I said a moment ago, there are 2 groups that came out of our Race Equality Charter, Mark. We've got the senior management group that's responsible for the various areas of the action plan. And the second group is really to continue the conversations across the institution on race and racism. So that group is called the Equity Collective, and that's open to all staff and students who want to participate in these conversations. And it's a forum, and we meet every 2 weeks, and we continue the anti-racism conversations. And also there are actions that come out of the Equity Collective. We have different themes that we talk about. So more recently, we were talking about the acronym BAME. We talk about academic misconduct. That feeds into the degree award gaps, because when we look at the students who experience the allegations of academic misconduct, I don't know what it's like at the OU, but at UEL and indeed, across many of those London universities, the majority of the students compared to white students are Black and brown students. We also spent a lot of time talking about racial bias in assessment and marking, and we believe that once again contributes to the gaps that we see in degree awards. Some of the other projects that have come out of our action plan, you can see, in the boxes there. So we have a reading group, and the poster that you see on the right hand side of your screen it just shows you the kind of books that we have been reading in our reading group. And they are books that generally, our students, and we've got a lot of students in the reading group, our students are reading authors of colour for the first time when they attend our reading group. So, the Audre Lordes, the Roxane Gay, James Baldwin. We also have body equality and athletic therapy, so the BEAT group. And once again, that's very, very similar, but the readings that they focus on are largely cultural studies and sport readings. So once again, underrepresented authors focused on in that group. We have a project whereby we are focusing on decolonising the library resources. We have some projects that have come out of the REC because of some research that a couple of our librarians undertook, and found that the majority of the resources, so the reading lists, were white men. And so there was a push for us to highlight that across our 6 schools, but also the challenges there for colleagues to look beyond, authors who are white, who are male. And then we also formed our anti-racist affinity group across the institution. So we have that group for staff and for students, and that's a group for staff, white staff, who are racialized as white, or who get white privilege, white benefits, if you like. That is a group for white staff to talk about whiteness within the institution and to focus on what they can do to, be allies, if you like. And so, questions that they pose, how confident are you in addressing racism? If a student came to you and gave you an example of something that happened in class, what would you do? And they support each other to figure out what they would do to address that issue. Also, with the White Anti-Racist Affinity Group, we give students the opportunity to be accountable, so they can link in with the group and they can hold that group accountable for change. So 1 year on, I think we've accomplished a lot at the institution. There's a lot to be proud of, but there's an awful lot more work to be done. So over a 5-year period, our degree gap has hovered between 19.4% through to 25.4%. Last year, it was 20%. Now, when we looked at our degree award data, we found that we have a gap of 14%. So within the space of a year, this energy that we have used to focus on this as a really important issue within our institution has resulted in a decrease by 6%. And our degree award gap at UEL has never been so low. I mean, there's still a lot of work to be done. 14% is still not okay. It's not okay, but we're heading in the right direction, so that's great. As I said before, we have the Equity Collective, so we're having open conversations about dismantling institutional racism, and those conversations are happening with not just, you know, staff of colour or black and brown staff, they are happening with white staff as well. And I think more and more white staff are getting involved, especially given the events of the summer and, you know, the horrific murder of George Floyd. Lots of white staff recognise that they need to join in this process. They need to be part of the process, because this cannot rest on the shoulders of those individuals who are the most marginalised. Last year, one of my colleagues, Lorraine Jones, established the Black Academy. You know, I said earlier, representation and role models are absolutely key. All of our students, and I'm not just talking about black and brown students, I'm talking about all of our students, need to see black and brown individuals in the academy. And Lorraine always talks about this by way of making the invisible visible. So what we have done over the course of the year is come together and host events whereby all of us are in front of our students. So last November, we held an event whereby, you know, we had 20 black members of staff sat in a lecture theatre just at the front, all of us at the same time. And students were amazed, because some of those students, you know, in some of those departments, there are no black staff. And they did not realise that the university actually had so many black staff. So we all came together. And so the Black Academy is something that is ongoing for all of our students, you know, so that they can see that there is representation. As I said a moment ago, you know, there's still a lot of work to be done around academic misconduct, the progression of students, employability, retention. You know, it's all there and it needs constant attention, because when we look at the data with regards to these various areas, it is always black students, black and brown students, that are at the bottom of the pile. And, you know, it's an issue of equality of experience. So I will leave you with a final thought from Nikki Giovanni. As long as higher education remains all white, the message we send is in our actions, not in our words. As long as higher education considers itself higher with all the privileges, but none of the attendant responsibilities, then hypocrisy is the lesson our students learn. We in the universities and colleges must close the gap between what we say and what we do. Now, that's a quote from 1994, so what, 26 years ago, and it still holds true today. And it's a quote from her essay, A Theory of Patience, and that is in her book, Racism 101. Thank you so much for listening.